Josh is a student here at USU working on his master's degree, but he was also for 2 years the farm manager at the USU Organic Student Farm. And so his background is very much in the area of organic agriculture. So I'm going to give the time over to Josh.
All right, thanks. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here to listen about some organic options. Some of the things we're going to go over today are going to overlap a little bit about what Dr. Drost talked about in the nutrient management, but we'll start out with what does a USDA certified organic mean, what it'll mean to growers and also to the public. We'll go over some nutrients and kind of show how they differ from conventional fertilizers. And then we'll talk some on weed management and also on pest management. So with our USDA certification, what does it mean? It really means that there's a verification of the process that you use. And a lot of the times that's what people want to see, the public. One of the reasons why organic production has grown so quickly is because people feel like there's some kind of boundaries that have been set that they can rely on and hope that there's some consistency there. It also gets a third party involved, meaning the USDA, you have certifiers that you work with. Those of you who have done it, you have to meet with them and verify this whole process. And then it's important to know what organic certification is not, one of which is a guarantee of quality. It's not going to be straight across the board what you're going to get out of it. It's going to be whatever the grower, as I guess us as growers, what we do, and that's going to be the quality that's going to be given to the public. It doesn't guarantee that there is a greater amount of nutrition in our products. Doesn't mean that it won't be pesticide free, because there is organic types of pesticides that can be used. And then it's I just put on there not other random ideas you find on TikTok. This is not the social side of things. This is more looking at just what it is according to the USDA within their standards. There we go. All right, so what does the certification mean for growers? For us, it means that we're going to be using alternative methods. So instead of using our synthetic fertilizers like ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate and things like that out of a bag, we're going to be using bags of compost or different things like that. It means we're going to do a lot of record keeping. That I think of it from seed to table instead of farm to table, going seed to table, because you have to use organic seeds and you have to show that you've done the right processes all the way through. And then even when you harvest it and hand it off to the consumer, we have to have certifier meetings where we show that our process is within those boundaries that are set, and prove to them that show that our food really was grown organically within those. And then also it means that we can get a increased amount of money for our crops, which is awesome. That's one of the biggest things. Dr. Drost did show on there, feather meal was one of the fertilizers. Some things can cost more as far as our inputs, but we can get a premium for what we're selling. So that's one of the pluses. And then I think one of the most important things is that we can label our products organic. Without having the USDA certification, then we're not supposed to put organic on any of our things, because we have to show that it's been through that process. In order for people to trust the products, they can't just have people that are saying it is organically grown or things like that. Just to make clarity on there, the USDA has come up with these things, so able to label it that way. Now for the public, kind of mentioned this already, but it means that they know that the system is regulated, and people who are studying it and studying about the organic produce, then they're gonna see that they like what they're reading, and they're gonna expect it to be within those boundaries. Consistency within it, though, it doesn't really mean that all things are consistent. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be the same across the board when you go from one store to another. Organic produce is different. But ultimately, it's that process verification that the public is looking for. Now, jumping into nutrients, like Dr. Drost said, we do a soil test to see what we have. The one thing that I have added here is organic matter as our soil test. Because in organic production, we're going to be using a lot of things, maybe cover crops, maybe taking our plants and chopping them up and tilling them back into the soil. And we want to know what kind of credit towards the fertilizer for the season that we have there. So we test for that. Now, one of the great things I think is out there is what's an OMRI listed product. And so this big label over here, OMRI is Organic Material Research Review Institute, sorry. And what they do is if people want to have their products looked over and to make sure that they can be used in the USDA certified systems, they can send their products in, they'll be reviewed. This is fertilizers and different things. When they're approved, then they can have this label put on, and they're able to, anything that has that label, then you can use no matter what. It is not a requirement. There are some things that are used in organic that are not OMRI certified, but these things, when you want to use them, then what you'll have to do is go through the certifier. You'll put it on your farm plan for the year, and then they can tell you whether or not it fits into that. And just a note, whenever you change things in organic, if you want to maybe change some kind of input you're using, some kind of fertilizer, you need to update that with the certifier as well. So it just becomes part of it. But OMRI is a great way of being safe. Now we have some alternative fertilizers. We call them alternative because they're not just used in organic, but they're also used in conventional things. People can use them to build up their soils and different things. So they're not just organic, but they're mostly what we use. So most of them release slowly during the season. They're a little bit more complex compounds, come from a lot of waste products and things that are going to be at lower levels of the nutrient when you think of per pound. And that's part of the reason why it can be a little bit more money in order to get these. But there is multiple nutrients in each. So when you think of a bag of fertilizer that has, the NPK on it, then these are going to have some type of analysis, and you can use them according to that, to your needs. I have just a small amount of the types that are out there. There is a huge list of these that are available. So we have composted manures, whether that's, just from dairies and things, and green waste. There's other waste products from animals, like fish emulsion. If you ever use that, those of you who have know how amazing the smell is, if you know what I mean. And just to point out, that's the top right picture that you see on the screen over here, this bottle. And it's hard to see, but right underneath my pointer there, or right above the pointer there, that's an OMRI certification. And also here, there's an OMRI certification on the blood meal. You can see what it looks like on the package. There's different feather meal, blood meal, bone meal. These are just dried down products that are ground up so they can be easily used. And then we have green manures that haven't been composted. And then we also have cover crops that fit into that category, because we don't usually want to just use these fertilizers like our meals and different things, because they're very expensive, but we can really build up our soils and feed our plants through cover cropping as well. And we're going to look at the cover crops fairly in depth. So Dr. Drost did talk a little bit about the application when it needs, the crop need to meet the application timing. And so over here, I have a graph that shows on watermelon, and it shows a little bit more. It shows some of our macronutrients that we need. And I thought this was really interesting, that when we see, if you follow this dark blue line here of nitrogen, you can see over here where our actually potassium needs go up above our nitrogen daily needs for watermelons. When you get around 45 plus days, it starts to really increase. So when we're thinking of organic fertilizers, then we have to make sure we have those kinds of things available for the plant. So we're going to have to match that with the fertilizers, and we're going to look at how to do that in just a minute. Like I said, they're going to take some time to become available, and so we're going to have to match that together. Now, I have some tables right here. These are from the University of New Hampshire. Up here, there's at the top, there's the website here where I found this. Now, what this is showing, I don't want to go over all of this because this is really complicated, but what I do want to show you is across the top, it's showing what kind of fertilizer or material, our contents as far as percents of nutrients, and then the relative release rate, meaning that it's going to be usually that way, but it's going to differ slightly between soils, and then what you use it for and when you may apply it. So I have a blown up section right here so we can see this a little bit easier. So these are very different fertilizers. One comes, our alfalfa meal comes from, of course, it's just dried down and ground up alfalfa, versus our blood meal that comes from animals. And so we have a very different analysis in it. So we have two nutrients in here of 2.5% of nitrogen, 2% of potassium, versus our blood meal that has a lot of nitrogen at 13% and just a little bit of phosphorus. And we have very different release rates. We have a medium rate of alfalfa. It's going to break down a little bit more in the soil over time, but then we have a really rapid release. So that comes down to where we can use these. So our alfalfa meal, it can be put in and last throughout the season. And then we can, if we need that high potassium, like we saw with the watermelon, then maybe we are going to put alfalfa meal. And if we want to still need to meet our nitrogen needs and it's not quite enough, then maybe we could add blood meal to it. And these things we can side dress with it, just like you would think of maybe if you've done using bagged fertilizer, ammonium sulfate or something that's just nitrogen. We can use it in that same way with our alternative fertilizers with this one, and then as well as say fish emulsion is similar, but a lower rate of nitrogen. So a lot of the times what we're doing with our organic fertilizers is mixing different ones together and using more than one method to get what we want. And we can get that good high yield that we're looking for. So I want to look quite a bit at cover crops, because cover crops are really important in a system. And using the cover crops over at the organic farm up here in Logan, they were crucial to the production. So these are some of the things that cover crops should give to us. So first, we should always have multiple benefits from it, meaning we should be having a cover crop that maybe catches the nutrients in the fall, and it also adds nutrients in the spring for us, and then can build up our soils and improve them. So we can have, if we have sandy soils or more clay soils, then we can have benefits kind of across the board, but it can really help the poor soils out there. We want to be able to implement them with resources we already have, maybe planters, maybe seeders that we have that we can go and plant it out in the field and make that work. We don't want to spend too much money on our cover crops, on our equipment, because especially with small farms, we don't want to put a bunch of money out there for big things or more things if we don't have to. So we can usually use some type of method to put these in. Same thing with with our inputs. We can keep the cost down and keep the money flowing high. Fit in with our production system is important, because depending on our climate, depending on what our year looks like, how much water we get in the spring, will depend on what cover crops can fit in. So up here in Logan, then we plant a fall cover crop, usually as fast as we can get in after our production is over. So I try to get it in before around October 1st in order for it to grow big enough. So you see in this picture over here, this was one of those cover crops mixed with weeds here. We had some weeds going on, but this was planted in the fall. And then this was in April, early April, that we had this, and it was this big. And one thing that needs to be noted is the appropriate time to terminate them and put them into the soil. So in this picture, I've actually, the cover crops extended clear out here to the right side, and this bare area is from cutting it down with the mower and then tilling it in, but waiting 3 weeks before I planted in order to let that break down in the soil and not become a problem, and also make sure that those nutrients were going to be available throughout the season. So it has to be matched to your soil type, and be careful of that, because if you have too much plant material mixed in there, it's hard to put plants into it And there's actually the credits that you already have from nitrogen being in the soil can be tied up within those cover crops being broken down. I do want to point out a couple of publications down here on cover crops. We kind of an introduction one here on the right, and then on the left, this cover crops for Utah goes over kind of in depth each different cover crop, when you may use it and what kind of situations. So those are great resources in order to look at. Now, I want to show, talk about a little bit about the benefits of it. The soil erosion can be a big deal. When we think about even pest management, when in the fall, I like to get rid of all of the plant residues and everything. I like to till them under and get rid of it and try to make it so I don't have any insects that would harbor out in the field. So through cucurbits, you may have out in the field where you have squash bugs that are hiding down inside of the old plants, and if they sit there and overwinter and make it through, they can come back out. And so I like to till those things up. So one of the issues that we can have if we leave it as a bare soil through the fall is we can have erosion. Cover cropping gets rid of that problem because we have some plants growing and holds down that soil. They can capture nutrients instead of having, like up here, we have a lot of snow right now. Nutrients are going to be pushed out of the soil, but if we can have a cover crop in there that can pick those up and put it into plant matter, then we can till that back in and use it. We can use it to suppress weeds, especially if you're doing a rotation where you, like we do up here, where we leave one field fallow and we use a summer cover crop and a fall cover crop. So we kind of mix and match cover crops together, two different types, and then try to cover the ground to build the nutrients and suppress weeds that we have. It can also help, like I said about sandy and clay soils, increase the water holding capacity, like Dr. Drost talked about for sandy soils, but also our penetration of the water into clay soils. And then one of the greatest things I think is increase the organic contents of the soil, because the soil microbes and everything just go crazy. The more we put inside of there and they break it down and balance it out, we can really get a good soil built up. These are some of the types of cover crops that we have. So a legume is one that we're going to look at more of nutrition for our nitrogen. The one that I used quite a bit was hairy vetch. There's quite a few of those available. Broadleafs, we're going to be soil covers for our erosion and then to capture the nutrients. And if you think of broadleafs, when they come out and they start to put on their true leaves, then they lay out pretty flat and cover the ground. And then our grasses and cereals also to capture. I've used the rye as well as mixed with the hairy vetch in order to do things. So this field, it's hard to see in this picture, but you can see kind of the rye that's been cut off the stems, but there is actually hairy vetch to kind of fill in the gaps underneath and build up the nutrients. There's a resource down here, the ARS website, that goes over more about these cover crops as well. So there's a lot of publications out there on this. Now, this is a table that came from sarah.org looking at cover crops. And if you go there to that website, you can search cover crops and find an array of different things. And so we're just going to look at legume cover crops, one of these tables that they have. So we have our cover crop on our left. So if we look at vetch that I use, it shows that it has a fall timing. When we want to plant that in, we have to give it enough time in the fall to produce some plant. We can't just put it in late because you won't get any growth in it. It'll really be a wasted crop. It gives you a range of the nitrogen per acre. And so that's along with that, when you're done at the end of and going to terminate that, if you really want to know what you have in it, you can take samples out of the field and send those into the lab as well and have that tested for the nutrient content. And then across the top, we have these 6 different characteristics of each one on a scale from 1 to 5. And so depending on what your soil type is like and what how you need to fix that soil, or if you just want to build it up or maintain, then you'll go through there and match it up. So there is also these for our cereals and broadleafs that you can find on the SARE website. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about weed management. Some of these things are what I learned in my processes at the farm, because it was a totally different beast to do it. And I realized really fast that I had to start with a weeding plan because they got out of hand very fast. And so I had to sit down and figure out a plan and go by that plan. And then I had to change it constantly, whatever the, depending on, say, the weather, then my weeding plan had to change a little bit because I was using drip irrigation. So I'm only having to weed in a certain area. But when the rain would come through, then all of a sudden everything is full of weeds. But I think planning that out in the first place is really important. And then mapping our weeds, especially when you're looking at perennial weeds. So mapping those out. So when you're getting certified, if you're doing the USDA certification, then you're going to be going through and planning out what you're going to do that year, where you're going to put all your plants, your rows, the spacings, all these different things that you hand in. So along with that, I used my map and simply added the weeds to it and said, this is where my problem areas are. These are where my problem areas or where areas are better. And depending on, we're talking about cucurbits today and what we're doing with those, but also if you're mixed farming, if you're going to be doing some squash, some summer squash, but also you're going to be doing carrots or different things, it's important to know where your weeds are really heavy in order to keep away from those areas with different crops. There's also a big difference in our annual and perennial weeds. And so with our annual weeds, we are trying to just knock them out when they're really small. We're trying to get them when they're in the smallest stage so we can cut them out and get them out of our system. But our perennials can be a little bit different. So say like bindweed, which I'm sure so many of us have, then what we can do with that is you can let it grow out 3 or 4 inches and then cut it off because it's pulling nutrients out of its own root system. And then you cut that off and it kind of depletes that root. And it's not putting at that stage, then it's not putting any more nutrients or energy back down into its roots yet. So it's just depleting itself. So you use different techniques like that because we don't want to ever get our weeds out of hand to where we have to take something out of production and maybe spray it with some kind of herbicides, because that takes us out of organic production for at least 3 years before it can be recertified. So that's something we want to avoid. So weed mapping can help us deal with that. And then our drip irrigation and our overhead. If you look at these 2 pictures here, this is the same row of plants going down, but along, if you follow my pointer, there's a pipe right here that's overhead that sprays out into this grass and it oversprays in there. And this picture on the right is what happens when we let our weeds get out of hand. We have thistle here, we have bindweed and everything else in between. So if at all costs, if you can get rid of the overhead irrigation, it's once you've learned it and figured it out, it works so good. And your weeds, it's gonna cut that down huge. Now here are some tools. They're pretty simple, but they were very important for me. If you're like me and grew up doing big gardens, my family had a huge garden growing up that we had to travel to because it was so big on some family acreage. Then we did everything by hand. And if I had one of these little wheel hoes over here, then it would have saved me a whole lot of time and backache. These wheel hoes are pretty inexpensive. You can really save on your labor costs and go really fast. There's lots of brands, but this one I use because it has a nice little hoop over here. You can straddle over plants, but has attachments and very adjustable. Pretty reasonable in the cost, and being small farms, it works really well. These are things that with how ours, we had our rows are about 300 feet long, and we had about 400-foot wide production area, and the wheel hoe was huge for us. We did very little weeding by hand or with a hoe standing up, just because we had this wheel hoe. There's also walk behind tractors, and these are a favorite of mine because it's kind of like the wheel hoe with an engine. So it's you can really cover large areas. This is the one that we used. It's an old one from the university from the 60s, and it's got some attachments down here on it, and it was really fast. Our cucurbit field had rows about 7 feet in between them, and we could cruise through here and cut all these little bindweed pieces out. And then after we use this, then pretty much we just kind of have to grab a few weeds out of there later in the season because it's so covered. We had winter squashes and things that vined out and covered up. So we only had to do this about 3 times in order to control it. And this is a publication that isn't too old, that from Dr. Drost was involved in this, and Melanie, who we're talking today, about using the small acreage tools. And you can look at that for more information on wheel hose and other things. Also, I talk about a little bit about plastic mulches that Dr. Drost talked about. These are a huge thing for me. If I knew about these when I was a kid, I would have forced my parents into getting some of these to cut down on my weed job, because that kind of job I wouldn't mind being out of work on. It really reduces the amount of pressure from weeds. We only have to usually do a couple of times weeding around these little holes in this bottom left picture, and then it starts to tiller out. And then this top picture here, by the end of the season, you can see how thick it gets. It doesn't mean there's no weeds, because there's a little bit of weeds down here at the bottom, this bindweed, but you can see how yellow it is and things. It's getting crowded out, so they work really well. There's other ground covers that you can use as well, but the plastic mulch is something that's really easy to use and really effective. Now, with our pest management, I just want to touch on that a little bit, because Nick's gonna go over some of those things as well. The number one thing that I did was scout for pests. This is something when the plants were very small, I saw the squash bugs come in. I knew I had an infestation, so that was something I was constantly looking at. And with plastic mulch, if you look at this picture, this right strip, this is one downfall of our plastic mulch. They can get underneath it, but we can also deal with those using other diatomaceous earth and different things to try to keep them out of there. You can use row covers to keep out, say, grasshoppers when they're coming in there and giving you trouble in the early season, like they did me. Using a rotation, you're going to be moving your plants around anyway as part of the organic certification, and so it's easy to rotate it away from where it was, or away from where pests got into it before. And then just keeping track of where all these things are, the presence on them, keep track of them on the map so you can make sure to avoid those things for a few years if possible. And then always keep track of your successful methods. If you're like me, you'll forget about what you did the last year, and so important to do. So with that, that's the end of what I've got for you there. I also, while we do questions, I'll leave this up. These are some of the other resources that you could take down or picture or whatever you want to do. Like Dr. Drost said, this will be put back up online at some point. But these are really good resources to look more into organic production. That's just a plethora of information out there.
Okay, Josh, that's really good. We do have one question here. We've got about 2 minutes left in the presentation. Please fill in the poll question while it's up, and then you can listen to the answer that he has. And one of our attendees asked this question: with regards to cover crops, how are you getting water to these plants late in the season after you've been set up with a drip system for the cucurbits? Are you bringing in sprinklers? And late season water can be a challenge. So what do you think is best when it comes, what cover crops are best when it comes to late season to minimize water use and that type of stuff?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because we usually don't put any water out to them unless we really have to. But like our water shuts off basically by the time we're done with our regular production around the 1st of October, maybe going a little bit into October if there's more water. So really, for the most part, we rely on the soil moisture that's there, and just for other things to come in. We had really good luck with using rye that we put in, and it doesn't need a whole lot of soil moisture to get going. And then just the snow and things that would come through, we kind of have some warm spells and cool spells that come through and give us some moisture in the fall and keep those going.
Yeah, perfect. I think that, really addresses, I was thinking the same thing. So her comments, just another one, she comes in here. So I understand correctly, how do you deal with bindweed in the field? You pull it or you cut it or what?
Yeah, so I don't pull it. you just wait. You want to just wait till it's 3 to 4 inches long. You let it tiller out just a little bit. It's one of those things you don't want to let it get to seed, but 3 or 4 inches, you just let that come out and deplete that root. And then you just cut it off and leave it. It'll just die as long as your soil is not all wet, which it shouldn't be, especially if you're using plastic mulch and drip. Yeah, just cut that off and leave it. It'll just die off. But if you just continually do that, you'll see that it really just slows way down as the season wears on. It works really well.